Hey, good evening, friends. Welcome to another round of Pub Theology. My name is Pastor Gavin Rogers, and we welcome you into this place. Each and every week, we meet here at Pub Theology to talk about our faith, our community, and creating the common good. We normally, in the past, for many years, met at the Friendly Spot. I'm repping their shirt, Defend Friends, which I think is appropriate tonight because we're going to defend all of our friends here in San Antonio, and that's what hopefully we're all about. We have a really important conversation that takes place, but we're grateful that we can meet online during this time, and we hope everyone is safe. Please go and share this video to anyone that you might feel interested in this topic, and it's an important topic tonight. The theme tonight is Stop Asian Hate, a conversation with leaders in the AAPI community, the Asian American and Pacific Islander community here, not only in San Antonio, but across the nation. As you know, we have experienced in the last few weeks extreme violence against those in the Asian community, and we're here to talk about it and to talk about serious topics to not only stop the hate, but also support our community and lifting up our AAPI siblings. And I'm with my co-host tonight, Jackie Wang from the Rivard Report. Jackie, how are you?
Hi, Gavin. I just have one correction for you.
Okay.
We're not the San Antonio report, remember?
Oh, that's right. I'm so sorry. I'm glad that was the only mistake I made. It's no longer the Rivard Report. It's the San Antonio Report. That's so good to remind myself of that. And so we're glad with you. That's right. With the San Antonio Report, Jackie, thanks for being here and joining this conversation. I know you've been to Pub Theologies in the past, and we're glad that you're with us again, and always the support from the San Antonio Report. So that's good to know. We are also with my good friend Myra Dumapias, who I met at the vigil a few days ago. Thank you for being here, Myra.
Thank you for having me here this evening.
Thank you for being a leader in the community. And we're going to have everybody introduce themselves and all that they do here in San Antonio. We're also with Gina Ortiz Jones. Hello, Gina. How are you?
Hi, how are you?
Good. Gina is also an activist, a political engaged person. She's run for Congress and she's here with us. She also helped organize the vigil at San Fernando Cathedral on Saturday evening. You can go to her Facebook page and watch that vigil, which most everyone here on the podcast participated and spoke at that. And you can hear the amazing words they shared in much more detail than we probably can get to tonight. We also have Ken Huey. How are you, Ken?
Hey, good evening, everyone.
Good, Ken. Ken, I'm glad you're here. Also a leader of the AAPI community. They're all going to talk about their various groups and how they're supporting their community here later on. So, Ken, thank you for being here. We would get more into detail, but we have a lot of people. We have Kyle Wang. Wang. Sorry, Kyle Huang. How are you, Kyle?
Doing all right. Thank you so much for having me on.
Kyle is a student and probably the best leader amongst us here. He spoke really well at the vigil. Kyle, you really had some great words to share, and we're just so passionate about your leadership and your ability to engage your community at 17 years old. What high school again do you go to?
I go to Brandeis High School.
That's right, Brandeis High School, repping Brandeis High School. We're glad you're here. And last but not least, we have Becca Moyer DeFelice. How are you?
Hi, good. Thanks for having me on.
Great. She is a gun violence activist, and we're going to also talk about that and just what has been happening around our nation and the violence used with guns and how it's become an epidemic in our society. So we have a lot to talk about. We have a lot of panelists, and so we are going to go around the room, and we'll have Jackie introduce you one at a time, and you get to little share about yourself, and she has one extra question to add to your basic introduction. So welcome to Pub Theology. We're glad you're here. All voices matter. And remember, that's the most important thing here at Pub Theology, that we want all people to feel safe and welcome, even when we talk about hard topics. And so grab a beer, grab a drink. I know we can't meet at the Friendly Spot, but we're going to have a really important conversation with these amazing friends of ours. So Jackie.
Hi. So I'm actually going to let everyone give a short bio so that everyone who's watching can get a feel for what you've done and why you're here talking today. But I did want to ask everybody to add a little bit onto their introduction, which is to tell us a little bit more about what being Asian American means to you, and like when did you become cognizant of that label and like what does that label mean. So I'll let Myra start first.
Hey, Meyer, you might need to unmute yourself real fast.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
So for those who may not have read our impressive bios before the event, I've been in San Antonio for 15 years. I have a background in community organizing that dates back to my days in Los Angeles. So I worked with a lot of Asian Pacific labor organizers, including community organizers that worked for the rights and dignity of sex workers and for people, and also community organizers who worked for the redress movement for comfort women. And I also directly worked with trafficked women. So I'm very invested in the the safety and dignity of women in general, and their dignity and their right to protection, and being seen and considered as humans alongside everyone. And so with that, the event and tragedy in Atlanta for me is very much tied to work I've done in the past. And here in San Antonio, I lead the organization called Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders for Justice, which is focused on San Antonio. Even though I have a background of growing up in various countries from Malaysia to China to Germany, and almost like a military brat.
All right. Well, thank you, Myra. I'm looking at my screen. I'm just going to go clockwise. So Gina, you next, please.
Great. Well, thanks so much for having us, Gavin and Jackie. And when I organized the vigil this past Saturday, I'm really thankful, Gavin, that you and Pastor Valerie Vogt also were part of that. It came together very quickly, and I just really want to again say thank you to everyone that participated, and of course for those of you that joined us in person, thank you for standing in solidarity with our community during this very difficult time. I'm a proud first-generation American, proud Filipino American, and I grew up here in San Antonio. I'm an Air Force veteran, Iraq War veteran, worked in national security for almost 15 years before deciding to serve in a different way and running for public office. The events, not only with Mike Wynn with Noodle Tree, Texas, but also the massacre of the Asian women in Atlanta really, wanted me, it just caused me to step forward and say, we need to do something. There were so many folks that certainly within our AAPI community that were feeling quite fearful and really needed that type of support. On top of, I had many folks reaching out to me and saying, how can I support? So I'm just glad that our event came together so well and the community could support and feel supported during this time.
Thanks, Gina. Ken, do you want to go next?
Yeah, hi everybody. My name's Ken Hui, and my family and I, we immigrated from Hong Kong to San Antonio in 1968. So I think that makes me the boomer of this group here. And so I grew up in the west side of San Antonio, maybe about a mile and a half from downtown San Antonio. And I went to high school, prior to downtown Fox Tech High School. So, and I've seen San Antonio kind of evolve over the years. And, I didn't say, hey, I'm going to grow up and I'm going to be an advocate. No, I went to work for the Air Force as a civilian. I retired about 4 years ago. I was a chief engineer for cyber weapon systems. And it was time that I figured it's time to give back. And the national organization I belong to is the Chinese American Citizens Alliance. We were founded in 1895. And again, our main mission is to practice and defend Chinese American citizenship and to preserve our cultural heritage. And if you know the history of Chinese Americans in the United States, you understand how important that means for us to be citizens. Because, before our organization was founded, Chinese were not allowed to bank. We weren't allowed to buy insurance. So again, my national organization formed a bank, formed an insurance company to help Chinese Americans. So now we have 20 chapters across the country. And again, we are an alliance of local organizations. So again, with the mission of advocating for Chinese American citizenship. And I'm also involved locally with the Asian American Alliance of San Antonio. And this is a unique organization that I haven't seen in many cities. This is an umbrella organization that we currently have 25 of the largest and the most influential organizations in San Antonio. And we span from professional organizations to trade groups to business groups to chambers of commerce to cultural to civil rights organizations. So I'm the immediate past president. I'm still very involved. And again, I'm seeing all these incidents that are happening in the East Coast and West Coast. And I'm seeing our Asian AAPI seniors getting attacked. And, it gets me in the heart. These predators are going after our seniors, and that is not right. So again, we're using these platforms to really speak out against Asian American hate. Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. Becca, do you want to go next?
Sure. So my name is Becca Moyer DeFelice. I have kind of a convoluted pathway to activism and advocacy. I was adopted as an infant, and so I grew up in a German-American Mennonite family in rural Pennsylvania. That is why it seems like my name doesn't match my face, which is something that I get a lot. But nonetheless, here I am. So I'm a mom, and I've spent the last 6 years in gun violence prevention advocacy. I'm a gun owner, I'm a woman of color, and I believe very strongly that data-driven policy reform will keep my child and everyone else's family safer. So the way that I was brought up was very much to keep my head down and assimilate. I was always a very extreme minority. So getting to the point where I am now, in my family, we call it being Asian out loud, where we are asserting ourselves in spaces that have not always been welcoming to us. But to me, I know that representation is so vitally important for AAPIs. And until we're willing to take that step forward and fight for the things that we truly believe in every arena, we will always be erased. And that's something that, for the sake of my daughter, I'm just not willing to further that environment of silence. So so I've done the advocacy work. I ran for office. To the best of our knowledge, I was the first Korean American woman to run for the Texas State House. And it was one of those steps forward that we take in the efforts to make the pathway that much easier for the women that come after us.
Thank you, Becca. And we'll end with Kyle.
My name is Kyle Huang, and I'm a senior in high school. I was born in Houston, Texas, spent half of my life in the California Bay Area and the second half in San Antonio, Texas. And these are two pretty distinct experiences, and it really formed an identity of what it means to be Asian American. And as far as what that's led me to do, I mean, I can't vote. I'm still 17. Over the past couple of election cycles, I've done what I could. I phone banked, knocked on doors, volunteered with campaigns, just the stuff that's open to somebody who's a child, basically. And so I was invited to speak at the anti-Asian hate vigil downtown, and I felt like I had a message that I could address from the younger generation of Asian Americans. And truth be told, my generation of Asian Americans is more progressive, and we're more open-minded, and we do see that racism exists, and we want that to end so that we can have equity and equality in the United States. Fortunately, I was given the platform to do so, and it seems like my words have caught on. I hope to be able to do more in the future, but I'm just getting started. Thank you.
No, we are glad you're getting started, and we're glad everyone's here. And we also understand this conversation. When you speak about race, we don't speak in monolith. We want people to speak in their own way, in their own heartbeat, and to have honest conversations. You know, this isn't a news program, but we really want this to be a video cast and really usually a shared experience in person, so we can better understand each other in our community, understand how our differences can bring us together, and that we can become a better community and create the common good. So thank you for Kyle for being here. Thank you for all who are being here. And we won't press you on where you might be applying for college, right? We'll keep everybody might have their own team here. So we are excited that you're here. So we do need to spend some time with Gina Ortiz Jones. She has to leave at a certain time. So we want to have this conversation. We're going to kind of go around the room again and have one-on-one conversations with each and every one of you, and then bring each other back in throughout the program. I do want to invite our listeners. Hey, we want you to be engaged like you are around this circle, and you can post your comments on our Pup Theology Facebook page of stream or our YouTube stream. You need to go to that channel and post your comments. We will see that in the section below. If you have any questions for our panel, our panelists, you can be direct and ask honest questions, and we will go through those and find the ones that are appropriate and to share with that throughout the programs. So please do not be afraid to post those comments. So we'll continue our conversation with Gina, and we'll bring everybody back here soon. Gina, how are you?
Good. Thanks again for hosting this. This is important, right? I mean, we are the Asian Americans, Asian American Pacific Islanders. We're the fastest growing minority in the state. And for us to really make sure that we are represented, especially during this time, and speak out about certainly what's happened here locally, but what's happening across the country is important. So thank you for bringing attention to this.
Well, no, thank you. Gina, obviously the violence happened, the killings happened in Atlanta, Georgia, and it just resurfaced the Asian hate that we've been seeing for quite some time throughout, and not only here just directly in San Antonio at various restaurants receiving hate. So that obviously drew your heartstrings to make sure that we need to stand in solidarity with one another. But tell us another reasons why you gathered everybody to San Fernando and what's on your heart.
Well, I mean, when you think of San Fernando Cathedral, that is the gathering point, right? When at any point in time when there is a community in need, or when there was something that we as a community need to rally around or show support for, it's at San Fernando. So I was very deliberate in picking that location because that's our space just as much as any others, right? And I'm thankful that that came together in 48 hours. So I am thankful that Mayor Ron, Chief McManus, you saw the handful of electeds that were there, State Senator Menendez, Representative Diego Bernal, and Tommy Calvert, just really show up and show support for our community. And I think about, to your point, yes, the violence that we've seen recently, but let's not forget, it's been a year that our community has been scapegoated, right? These folks, these leaders, right, federal leaders, the former administration they've just been in, as well as frankly members of Congress and other leaders, just have been indifferent to how their racist language put a bullseye on the backs of Asian Americans all across this country. They were indifferent to that. And so, for many of us within the Asian community, we were waiting for this shoe to drop, right? This is our Christchurch. This is our El Paso shooting. And it's unfortunate that we kind of knew this was coming, but it's inevitable when you have that type of language, that type of hateful rhetoric, on top of, frankly, lax gun laws, right? And that's really, when you look at the speakers that I asked to participate, I mean, this was an event that was really focused on at really getting at what we saw in Atlanta, which is the intersection of racism, misogyny, and lax gun laws.
That's good.
I think so.
No, I'm signaling to Jackie. She has got a question for you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Well, I actually wanted to ask because like when you think about the San Antonio Asian community, it's fairly small, right? And I don't feel like there's maybe like one gathering spot that we all had. So San Fernando makes a lot of sense because it's the part of like San Antonio in general. But for me, I was really surprised when, someone was going to be racist against Asians in San Antonio. I shouldn't have, probably, but like, I've always felt so welcomed here. Like, everyone has been so kind of like diversity in San Antonio. What was your reaction to seeing such blatant racism come up in our town?
Well, I mean, I don't think any community is immune to that, right? I mean, I think, and that's why it's just so important that when it does show up in whatever form, whether it's vandalization, right? Whether it's the unfortunate massacre, or whether it's frankly even just microaggressions, right? We need to take the steps that correct those actions, those words very, very quickly, because all of this builds on itself, and failing to address it, failing to, frankly, elect leaders that have the courage to also stamp this out, this is going to continue to happen in our communities. And I think it's really important, right? What do we 30 days ish from the municipal election, and we've got two very clear choices, right? We've got Mayor Ron, who showed up to our event and showed compassion and empathy, and wants to make sure that our community is one in which everyone feels welcomed and safe. And then we have the other guy, right, Greg Brockhouse, who currently thinks it is not racist to say China virus. That is unacceptable. That puts people's lives in harm's way. And it's just a demonstration that he's unfit to lead this city, right? And so we've got to be very clear about where we stand, and we need to stand with the folks that stand with us, not those that are going to, frankly, again, put a bullseye on our back with their racist words.
So what other solutions does the Asian American community have at its disposal? Because like you said, we can say, like, don't say these things. It's bad. It's harmful. It perpetuates stereotypes that lead to real violence. But what other things can, we as ordinary citizens do?
Yeah, no, thank you for raising that, because I had a call to action at the end of the vigil, and I want to reiterate those, because that's for anybody. And so there are three concrete things to be a good ally to the Asian American community in this time. One, attend bystander training. So you can go to ihollaback.org. So I and then HOLLA back.org, and it's free, it's online, it's only an hour long. And these are the practical tips that you could use if you see somebody being hurt, whether they be Asian American or what have you, that could literally save somebody's life. Right? Your words, your courage, your presence in that moment could be the factor that saves somebody's life. So please sign up for that training, ihollaback.org. Secondly, if you want to immediately help the families in Atlanta, go to Asian Americans Advancing Justice Atlanta chapter. And it's those folks that are on the ground helping those victims and their families get through this very difficult time. You can make a donation directly to them at Asian Americans Advancing Justice Atlanta chapter. And then lastly, locally, go to Asian American businesses, patronize those businesses, invest, go to the Asian American grocery store. If you've never been to one, it's eye-opening, right? You and I know what it's like, but many folks probably have never been to one. And to be honest, it's probably right around the corner. And from where you are, I mean, we might not be the largest community in the city, but it's certainly a community that is well represented all throughout, to include in our small businesses. So actually check out the Alamo Asian American Chamber of Commerce. It represents about 400 some odd businesses, 80% of which are owned by AAPIs. And it's a great place to find other Asian American businesses that you can support. So those are three practical things you can do to be a good ally to the Asian American community right now.
I don't know. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oh, are we? Just let me know if we're running out of time. I was just going to ask, if this is a little personal. You don't really have to answer it, but do you have any situations in mind where, like you said, the bystander, be a bystander that comes in and says something like, is there a time that comes to mind when you wish someone would have stepped in for you?
For me, I'm pretty vocal, but I'll be honest. I was just texting with a friend of mine today, who's also Filipino American, and she was saying, we were talking about just kind of what's going on now, and she was saying how her mom came home upset the other day, and her mom is older. She's in her 70s. And it turns out her mom was in the grocery store and checking out. And she had two distinct things she needed to buy, two groups of things. So she was using two dividers, on the checkout place. And this guy kept moving the second one. And she was like, please stop doing that. And he said, you people think you can do whatever you want in this country. That's not how it works here. And literally all my aunt was doing was separating her aunties, is what we call all of our, older folks in the family, but separating her groceries. And so the fact that somebody would say that, now I can't say for sure, was it because she's an Asian woman? Is it because she's an older Asian woman? But it's those types of instances that I would certainly hope that folks would step up and say, hey, stop it with being a jerk. And it really makes all the difference, because those types of experiences, those sit with people, right? And that affects them. My aunt's been here over 35 years, and for that to still be kind of an experience that she has, that shows that we have still a long way to go. But it's on all of us, right? All of us to make sure that we feel safe in our community.
Oh, thank you. And I want to bring in Myra real fast and kind of share this experience with everybody. I'm trying to get everybody included as we can. And, one thing that I learned from this rally by hearing both you and Gina speak, Myra, is to be good listeners, that I needed to hear certain things that remind me as a person, not in the community, a person of privilege in so many ways, that can misidentify, that can just misunderstand and not see the pain and struggles other people are experiencing, and be reminded of that. And so we as a community in San Antonio, we need to be better listeners and understand when we hear language from politicians that use racial language when politicizing the coronavirus, right? We need to do a better job in understanding that it's not acceptable. We just don't let that slide. And just hearing personal stories and your testimonies. And one thing that really struck me when you gave your testimony, Myra, was, you talked about just understanding and misunderstanding how oftentimes people from Asian descent are seen as commodities. And so I have a question that we formed for you, and is that how do we untangle racism from sexism and misogyny in the context of the Atlanta shootings? Can we do that? 6 were Asian, 2 were not, but many people cried racism. Other people cried that it was a sexual addiction. And all of a sudden, the real language got lost in the media. So you shared deeply about that. And I think it's a very important thing that we need to hit on tonight.
Yes. What happened with a lot of the headlines and the media coverage was that there was a focus, the first few days, and it's horrible that it took more than one day, first of all. That for days, media covered a focus on the murderer's sexual addiction, mostly because it was released by the words of a racist sheriff. And I know there's people who disagree with that, but there's a lot more evidence that he wasn't very socially conscious, and at least not very sensitive to the people that died, the lives that we lost. And so what happened with that narrative was that Asian women have become so minimized to a sexual object, to the extent that even in a horrific death, in a mass shooting, when other mass shootings wouldn't necessarily get this type of attention, right? Where the 6 lives were missing from the headlines, and their identity was missing from the headlines, we're objectified to sexual objects and sexual deviation on top of that when 6 women lost their lives, it was the male's addiction that dominated the headlines in the US. That is very sobering, and that's a very big problem. How do you think the families of the victims feel? Waking up to that in the headlines, that, oh, it's not about my daughter dying, it's about his sexual addiction. That's ridiculous. And to be passed off as just a bad day, that was even worse. So
I will say something, because I mean, I was watching it as well, you know, when he said those remarks, Myra, and probably like you know, my mouth dropped. I could not believe that this was the reaction, like that this, in this man's mind, was acceptable to say. And I could only think of the families, to your point, hearing this and having to be, frankly, victimized again, because now they are questioning whether, you know, are they going to see justice? If this is their first encounter with the justice system, in this instance, that would give nobody confidence that they were going to be treated fairly or with humanity or with dignity. And so I think that's really important, Gavin, to your point about listening, right? It's not that these things aren't being said. You know, you've had Asian American leaders for a year talking about stop saying Kung flu, stop saying China virus, stop saying these things. It's been said, but to your point, folks have not been listening, and folks did not truly understand, well, what's the worst that could happen? They're just words. Well, now we know, right? Now we know. Now we've known, frankly, we've known, but now folks are seeing it in a way that they did not understand previously.
No, and thank you. And leadership is important. Jackie.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on what you said about the justice system. I think one of the things that was really interesting was after the Atlanta shooting, you saw some communities say, we're going to help protect our Asian communities within our communities that with more police presence. And how is that as a solution, I guess, in y'all's minds, where it's like, we were going to add more police to prevent a problem? Like, is that the right solution? Is that part of the right solution? Like, how should we be approaching that?
I think the issue or the solution of increasing policing should be brought into the context of, is it the actual reason and cause for the vandalism, the anti-Asian vandalism at Noodle Tree? Is decreased policing, was that the cause of what happened at Noodle Tree? Is not enough policing the cause of what happened in Atlanta? So to pose that as a solution, we have to bring it back to the bigger picture. You know, is it addressing the cause? And is part of the reason that 6 Asian women died, and most of the victims were Asian, does it have to do anything with the problem that is still in existence in law enforcement, which is there are patterns showing that white supremacy still exists. And in our city, if I'm not representing the details incorrectly, one law enforcement officer was one of the individuals that stormed the U.S. Capitol. So we have to consider what increased policing really means, and what does it really mean if we're satisfied with just increased policing as the solution. There's a lot of community-centered approaches that I believe we all can consider as part of the solution, rather than just focusing on increased policing, and community-centered, community-focused solutions addressing things like racism, misogyny, and white supremacy, and the hypersexualization of women. And so I think when we think of solutions, we have to bring it back to the root cause of things and weigh and compare, why are we focusing so much on increased policing? And are all Asian Americans comfortable with approaching police officers? How have they been helped in the past? Personally, I know of stories where police officers haven't been able to save everyone. It happens in Asian American domestic violence situations where police officers actually imprison the Asian woman instead of punishing the abuser because of cultural and language differences. So we have to consider all of that as part of the big picture of solutions, I believe.
To add on that, I would say, I think it's important to appreciate the nuance between increased policing and having frankly, really strong allies like we clearly have in Chief McManus, right? I mean, you heard him speak at the vigil, and as they're, trying to be aggressive and get information about what happened at Noodle Tree, they're already thinking about the next steps, right? A potential cash, monetary incentive for those folks to come forward. And so there's a difference between, increased police presence and really smart approaches to how we get to addressing this issue, how we make sure there's justice is served for those that vandalized that business. And it's important because, I mentioned it, but just to share with those that weren't at the vigil, I invited Mike on Saturday. And when I spoke to his staff member, Mike is not doing public appearances. He's not doing interviews because he continues to receive threats against his life. And that is so unfortunate. Let's never forget how this all started, because he had the courage to speak out against a policy that he saw as threatening the health of his staff and of his customers. And so because he had the courage to step up and say something to protect people's lives, his own life is now being threatened. And so and that's why it's just so important that we have leaders, we have allies all throughout our community pushing back and making sure that we're making sure that all of our community feels safe and protected. I unfortunately have to jump off.
That's right. And I was going to say thank you for being here. And we are going to bring on Kyle. Kyle, how are you? And Gina, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being a voice and putting this all together.
Thank you.
Have a blessed night. Kyle, how are you?
I'm doing all right. Thanks for having me on.
Good. And I just want to continue this conversation. We're just going to kind of keep rotating because we want all of our voices to interact with one another. And we have a comment from one of our viewers and a question. And if you have a question and you're listening, you can please post that on our Facebook feed. Go to Theology San Antonio's Facebook feed, and you can connect with us through your question. But we have Kristen asked this question. As a person outside of the AAPI community, I appreciate the advice and insights from Gina on how to be a better ally and advocate for equality. On the flip side, what are some of the pitfall words and behaviors that someone should avoid when trying to be a better ally to this community? Kyle, do you have any advice to this question?
Yeah. So if there are any pitfalls, words, and behaviors, one of the big things is that, when you get close with someone, if you're, like good friends, I mean, you could say whatever, but, if you're just dealing with acquaintances, folks that are folks that or just like strangers in general, there are things like one of the common ones is, where were you born? Are you really from here? Those classic lines. Don't say those things. They're really kind of alienating. Some Asian Americans have been here for hundreds of years, and so that can be very, very disrespectful sometimes. Also, just don't reinforce cultural stereotypes. Like, for example, asking anybody who looks East Asian if they eat dogs. I know that can be used as like some kind of a joke sometimes, but it's really not something that should be said. And there are a multitude of these kinds of things. Just don't reinforce cultural stereotypes that are negative, or even ones that are positive. Like, you could say, "Are you a bad driver?" Just these kinds of cultural stereotypes. Don't apply them to people, and also be careful as to how you refer to Asian Americans, because there's a myth, the model minority myth, that says we're all high income earners, or we're all incredibly talented and smart. I mean, yes, we are all incredibly talented and smart, but the model minority myth ignores the fact that Asian Americans have the highest wealth disparity in our ethnic group. And to add to that, Asian Americans are not a monolith. There are so many countries in Asia, and from South Asia, Southwest Asia, East Asia, and so just be careful that you not generalize Asians and Asian Americans. just when you interact with them. And once again, just with those cultural stereotypes, once you become close friends with someone, you can poke fun of them or whatever. But just for the most part, just don't reinforce those kinds of things.
No, that's good. And Jackie's going to have a follow-up question just for Kyle here in a second, but I kind of want to go off something that I've kind of mentioned before, and that is like this characterization that I often see when it comes to Asian art or Asian restaurants. I've been in restaurants probably not owned by Asian owners that have artwork that sometimes I see as probably an over caricature of artwork that you might see somewhere else. And there's even places where I see heads, like Asian faces and heads as lamps, right? And people just see this as, and this is just right here in San Antonio. I'm not going to name the place, but when you see things like this, I just feel like if that was any other race, I feel like that was any other thing, and I said I'm going to have heads as lampstands, it would be highly, highly talked about. Where often do we see this? We obviously, when we hear the words like China virus, some people, our eyes kind of say, oh, that's not good. But then we walk into places, we see this cultural appropriation happening all around us. How detrimental is that often to the Asian community? And where can we take a stand and say, that's not appropriate? And I'm going to open this up to Ken as well. Hi, Ken.
So again, lots of good discussions here. And, I want to kind of follow up on what Kyle was saying about, how do you become a good ally? In my opinion, treat us as individuals, as who we are, not what we are. Do not objectify us, right? If I'm a bad driver, I'm a bad driver because I am a bad driver, not because I'm Chinese American, right? So treat us as individuals, and we don't ask for any more, right? I mean, if you see me at HEB, you don't have to rush up to me and say, hey, we're behind you. You don't need to do that, right? So again, treat us as who we are and not what we are. And then you talk about objectifying our culture. And I'll share with you a pet peeve. Mm-hmm. Don't rub the Buddha's belly. It's not to be rubbed. It's insulting. I look at it, it's like, why do people do that? So, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you.
Probably not what you asked, but I have to share.
But that's great. We learn something new every day. Myra, any thoughts? We want to get to other people. So lastly, we want to get back to you toward the end of the program. Any thoughts about cultural appropriation? And then we got a question for Kyle.
Yes, I think I've observed that similar decorations, and that's the reason why at the visual I also mentioned, please see us as people, right? Mm-hmm. Please see us as more than just decorations or a resource for decorations. I grew up in Malaysia, which is a mix of Chinese and Indian and Malaysian, and so I was in Southeast Asia, and nobody wore chopsticks in our hair, and we certainly didn't try to charge hundreds of dollars for a mahjong set. And I don't know if many of you heard about the group of American teens or young women who tried to market a mahjong set that was upgraded to be more fun and representative of who they were. And there was a lot of responses for that from the Chinese American community. And so for me, I agree with what everyone else has stated. And there's also a boundary, though, where you don't you see us as people, as opposed to being objects or decoration or sexual objects or only model minorities. But at the same time, you see us as a people with a history of being targeted by racism. Because if you only see us as people and divorce us from our identity, ethnic, racial, and historical context, you also take away some of the realities that we live with every day. So it's not a simple solution. Racism isn't a simple problem. It's got a long history. So the solutions also isn't going to be a 24-hour overnight solution either. And I just want to open the floor up for other people to chime in.
I do want to follow up on what Myra just said, because again, I mentioned I grew up here in San Antonio. So from the time I was in 3rd grade until the time that I left for college, there was not one day that I didn't hear a racist slur directed at me. Not one day, right? So when I came back to San Antonio, moved out of the West Side, again, these are, Hispanic racist slurs. I moved out of the West Side. Now we live in the Northwest Side. And it was maybe about 10 years ago. I was in a park with my daughter. And we had these little kids run up, and they were directing these same slurs that I had heard 30 some odd years ago. I'm thinking, these are the same slurs. Where could they have learned that? Mm. And I have to say, they obviously didn't learn it on TV, because I don't see it on TV. Yeah. It has to be learned at home. And to Myra's point about ending racism starts at home. If you don't teach your kids to be racist, if you don't teach your kids the racist slurs, they won't know it. And that just blew me away. I couldn't believe it. And by the way, this was a church group that was having a picnic at a park.
Yeah. Now, I do like having everyone on. So Myra, thank you for being here. We'll be back right here at the end. But what I like having Ken and Kyle on is that Ken prides himself. He reminded me that he's like, oh, I just lost my chair thing again. That he reminded me that he's been probably out of the panelists the longest in San Antonio, right? You kind of see yourself as the most senior here in representation, and that you take great pride in that. But also Kyle is a student here, so we have two different perspectives. And so Jackie has a question for Kyle that I think is important.
Well, yeah, I thank you for telling that story, Ken, because that really made me think. In high school, racism wasn't maybe as obvious. Like, I also grew up in a Latino majority. I'm from El Paso. I didn't really hear slurs, but like you hear other things that are like imbued with racism. So I was wondering, Kyle, it's been a while since I've been in high school. Do you feel like now, after some time, like, have we maybe divorced ourselves from some of these words? Have we maybe made any progress with the younger generation in terms of not being awful people?
Yeah, and just to start, it's very nuanced, and when in this kind of discussion, because my generation is very interesting. I'm lucky in that I did not face the amount of racism that Ken described, and I guess that's 50 years of changing societal norms, but it's still there from even in elementary school, middle school. You get the occasional teasing, you get the occasional person pulling their eyes back, that kind of stuff. That kind of stuff is still there, and I assure you, you pull any Asian American kid out of school now, Indian American, Chinese American, Japanese American, any of them, you pull them out of school now, they'll tell you somebody's been racist towards them. And it's really unfortunate. I'm blessed that at my high school, it's very diverse, and so a diverse environment makes it so that everybody's very accepting of each other. But racism is still there. You still have people making fun of you for this, and reinforcing those negative cultural stereotypes, asking you about that. But we have come a long way since Ken was in school, but it certainly has. It certainly still exists.
And I would probably remind that Ken, is a part of the Chinese American Citizens Alliance. They have lodges, I believe you told me, all over the nation, and it's the oldest kind of alliance that existed here in America. And I would imagine that some of these things back then were also true, that that, this has been a conversation needed to have for a long time. And so, Ken, how does Kyle's experience ring true to you?
Well, I'm glad that over the years, racism isn't as blatant as it was, but it also depends on which section in San Antonio, which part of town you're in, right? So again, growing up in the West Side, well, yeah, there seemed to be a lot more racism than there was in the northern sides of town. Okay, and I'm glad for my daughter that was the only instance where her and I where racial slurs were directed at us. Okay, but again, I do see San Antonio overall. Let's just not say this part of San Antonio, whatever, but overall San Antonio, I think we are, and I say this because it is true, we are a very accepting and a very diverse city, and I credit that to the military. I told you that I have worked with the military for 37 years, and as a group of people, that group of people, they are very accepting of diversity and diverse cultures, because again, a lot of these folks have been to the different parts of the world to see different people and accepting of how they live. So again, I think, and I really thank the military and the military culture for bringing that acceptance of diversity to San Antonio. And I think, moreover, it's more about, promoting merit rather than promoting, race advantages or disadvantages.
No, that's, I had a friend, she was one of the leaders of the physical therapy corps. She would have probably been a general if in her time the corps would have been big enough. So she was a full bird. And she told me that there was times when she lived in 1960s in San Antonio that she was more welcome on the military base, and they could go to movies together, they could go to different places on the base together. But when she left the base and she had to separate with her friends who she served in the military with, and she had to sit in a different section to watch a movie on Broadway Street, then she would go back to the base at Fort Sam Houston. And yes, you remind us that some perspectives in the military remind us that we can all work together and find that diversity as a powerful tool. I do want to get to other questions, and we have a great one from Jackie coming up. So Kyle, I'm going to drop you back, and then we're going to bring up Becca real quick. And Becca, how are you?
Becca, you're muted.
Yeah, you're muted, I believe. Are you there?
Sorry.
There you go. Good. Well, Becca, thank you so much. I'm glad you joined us. We wouldn't want to leave you backstage too long, but thank you for that. And we want to continue this conversation and really hear from your perspective. So Jackie, continue.
Yeah. The next thing I wanted to ask about was going a little bit back where Ken was saying that we've come a long way. Like, we still have racism, but it's not as in your face, usually not as violent, although we know there are exceptions to that. But throughout the pandemic, there has been a significant documented increase in anti-Asian attacks, whether that be physical assault or even something just like a microaggression. But seeing that, how do you feel like that pattern fits in with American history and like what we've seen in terms of Asian discrimination in the United States?
So I think that on one hand, it is nice that people no longer feel comfortable being blatantly outright racist towards us. But on the other hand, it's just much more subtle and insidious. So like when I was in school, because I was adopted and I was the only Asian American kid in my school, it was totally acceptable for kids to run up to me and say things like, my mom talked to your mom and she said they're sending you back to China. So I'm not from China, so that was like a little factual mistake there. But then, my daughter's in school now, she's in elementary, and last year when the rhetoric started to really ramp up, actually even before that, because it would have been February when they were still in school, a little girl walked up to my daughter and said, "You're Chinese and you have COVID, so I'm not going to sit near you." And my daughter being my daughter, her response was, "I'm not Chinese, I'm Korean. So if you're going to be mean, at least be right." So I think that for most Asian Americans, when we watched this fervor grow, we saw what happened in Atlanta coming. I mean, this is not a surprise to us that the intersection of misogyny and racism and xenophobia came together with gun violence. This was the day that we all expected to happen. And so when it did in fact happen, instead of being surprised, I think more than anything, I personally felt enraged. I mean, I'm approaching 40 and I've reached the point in my life where I just flat out am no longer going to be quiet and demure and that, kind of acquiescing, smiling person. And so even though I have been told repeatedly that people don't like when women get angry, I think that the default at this point for a lot of us is that we are literally incandescent with rage, because this is our country. We grew up here. We have roots here. We are raising our families here. We have every right to the personal safety that other Americans feel going about their days. And I have every right to be able to send my child to school without worrying about racist words being thrown at her by other elementary students. So, I mean, there's a lot of nodding happening here. I think that this is a really common feeling for us where we make such an attempt to humanize ourselves. And this is something that really, as women, we do it a lot. We say, well, I could be somebody's sister or mother or daughter. We should not have to humanize ourselves. This is not something that we should have to put effort into.
And your daughter's in elementary school, you said?
Mm-hmm. Yes, she is 11.
One of the things I was wondering, Ken, I know you went to elementary school a little bit earlier than we did, but how much of Asian history, like in America, was taught to y'all in school curriculum?
Let me see. I can summarize that. 0.
Nothing from you either, Becca?
I went to a private borderline fundamentalist school, so no, there was none.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, the extent of my education was I learned that Chinese immigrants were really fundamental in building the railroad. But I mean, in the last couple of weeks, like the things that I've learned that have, like, I think we all are familiar with the Chinese Exclusion Act in the 1800s. But I wasn't aware of things like lynchings that happened in the 1800s to thousands of Asians. I mean, again, 1941, we have the internment camps that Japanese Americans were funneled into. But even as recently as 1982, this might be a name that people are familiar with now that we're talking about Asian American history and violence perpetuated against Asians. But Vincent Chin was, a Chinese man who was beaten to death by 2 people who were calling him Chinese and Japanese slurs. And I think that kind of speaks also to the monolith that we have become in people's minds as Asian Americans. Japanese people and Chinese people might feel like they have a lot of differences in culture, but in America, we are all perceived as the same. So in at least San Antonio or in your lives in general, maybe not only here, how have y'all kind of fit your identity as a Chinese American, as a Korean American, under and also your identity as an Asian American that's so much broader than that? Because I mean, we don't have the same, heritage in terms of like what languages we speak, which food we eat, where we go back to visit and go, my great grandfather was from here. But how do you take your Asian American identity and how do you apply that to yourself?
Wow, that's an interesting question. I think one of the things that Asian Americans do well, and not just, let's say not just Asian Americans, Asians do well, is we integrate very well into the countries that we live, whether it be in England, whether it be in Brazil. good friend of mine, his family's from Panama. He's Chinese, Panamanian, and he speaks beautiful Spanish. But so again, how do we identify ourselves? I think we identify ourselves more with the areas that we're from. So for me, I'm a Texan. I identify myself as a Texan. Sometimes it's difficult for people to know, to say, gee, Ken, you're a Texan? For real? Yes, I am. Well, at least I got here as soon as I could, right? But again, I think it's because we integrate well that sometimes our later generations tend to lose those identities. But I am glad to see that with the current generations, they're beginning to embrace their Asian identities, the Asian roots. And Jackie, you mentioned Chin. That was horrible. That was despicable. I think the judge that tried the case, he was not in touch with reality to say that, well, these two guys beat this Chinese man to death, and it's a bad thing, but it's okay because they lost their jobs to the Japanese auto industry. It's not right. So
I want to bring back Myra before we're going to go around, and then we'll have a closing here, maybe in about 15 minutes if we can do that. And but I want to bring Myra back in for this conversation. Myra, glad to be with you again. I have a question for you. As we continue about looking into the future, and especially here in San Antonio, what do you think about our leadership? Does leadership of San Antonio actually reflect the AAPI community? There seems to me, that much representation. And the reason why that shouldn't focus on the model of minorities. So tell us a little bit, what's your solution to this? How do we get more and more people involved where they can be represented and heard? You're on mute real fast.
So I think the media has a role to play in this in terms of what stories are considered newsworthy. So for example, representing stories about Asian Americans in San Antonio doesn't always have to come from the business sector. It doesn't always have to come from who's represented as model minorities, because I noticed that pattern in San Antonio, that the only people that get the spotlight, the only Asian Americans that get the spotlight are model minorities. And that plays a big role in discussing important dialogue about racism and white supremacy and lack of representation and other important topics that Asian Americans have been grappling with for a long time. On March 26th is the day that Asian Americans around the nation are celebrating as a National Day of Action and Healing. And March 26th because it was the day in I believe 1870. Hold on, let me look at my own notes. But it was the day that the U.S. it was a day where the Naturalization Act was implemented, and it was the first time that Congress ever set rules on who could become a naturalized citizen, barring anyone that wasn't white, limiting it to only white persons to be able to apply to become citizens. And that only happened about a year before the U.S. Constitution was ever implemented into law as part of the new government of the United States. And that signifies to me that racism was already part of the foundation of how the U.S. was formed and found. So 200 years later, Asian Americans are still grappling with all these historical things, lynchings, and recent events, and there's not enough time to go through it all. But the reason why we haven't really addressed racism is because the issues of racism and the ugly, uncomfortable topics are hidden behind the model minority representation. We don't talk about Asian poverty because it's hidden behind the model minority representation. So wow. I just asked media to be able to open their gates and consider what is newsworthy. I remember approaching media before about, our history, our story of breaking Asian American silence in talking about social justice issues here in San Antonio. I don't think I'm the only one that thinks that not enough Asian Americans talk about social justice in San Antonio. And the response I got was that, and I linked it to October being Filipino American History Month, and because I also identify as Filipino American, I was born in Philippines. I grew up in Malaysia. The response I got was that we only cover stories that are newsworthy. I'm not quoting the word for word, but in a sense, the answer was very much that we cover stories that are based on newsworthiness and not not the month that's being celebrated at the time. And for me, for ethnic populations that have been on the margins, there's a reason why we celebrate a certain month as celebrating certain ethnicities and heritages and histories. It's because we've been silent and we've been invisible from mainstream and center stage. There's a book called Moving the Center by Ngugi wa Thiong'o. And it's all about how for generations and decades, civilizations have centered the white story as the main story. And again, when we talk about racism and trying to move the center away from white stories and white narratives, which happened again in Atlanta, we're not saying this is an attack against white people as individuals. We're saying this as a check ourselves, please, about why, what people of white descent are the ones that dominate history and media and news.
Yeah. No, it's no surprise that the white privilege and white supremacy is deeply in how we make our books of education, our history books, how we even explain history sides, and it all needs to be addressed. I do want to spend one more question before we close, and Jackie has a question for Becca.
Yeah, Becca, I don't know how much of your work with gun violence prevention is centered around maybe gathering Asian American perspective, but in your experience, what is the attitude of the Asian American community at large, as much as you can say at large, about gun reform and gun control laws?
So I'm going to say that the Asian American community reflects America at large because, like we've said, we're not a monolith. So we run the gamut in the organizations that I've volunteered with. Personally, I'm a gun owner, and that is something that I'm comfortable with because I know that I am a safe, responsible gun owner. So it runs a gamut from people who are totally anti-gun all the way to people who are gun extremists. So to try to pigeonhole us into one place is really uncomfortable for me. I will say, though, that for me personally, it's central to my identity as an Asian American is central to the work that I do. And it's because, especially now, we are so frequently erased from the narrative. Like Myra was saying, we've already been erased out of the narrative in Atlanta. And, for someone who had to tell her child that 6 women were shot and killed because they look like us, and now tomorrow I'm going to go to the Capitol and I'm going to testify against 4 separate bills that are seeking to dismantle the licensing requirements here in Texas to carry a loaded handgun in public. Like, this is just common sense. This is something that every gun owner every responsible gun owner embraces. Training, education, safe handling are the key. Those are your key responsibilities as a gun owner. So when the Texas legislature goes ahead and says, you know what, we're going to let anybody who can buy a gun carry that gun loaded in public spaces around your families. We're going to limit the way that localities say that you cannot carry in, say, a public park or at a parade or at a demonstration. Those things are so inherently dangerous to us as a general public that, to me, I have no choice but to speak up on that. And should anyone else want to speak up on that same issue, they can text the word Texas to 64433. and they'll be connected to a committee member for Homeland Security and Public Safety. And they will be able to say that they oppose permitless carry in our state.
Oh, thank you for that, and thank you for continue being that voice. And we know that it's a subject of discussion within this most recent violence, but we really wanted to spend our time speaking about the entire violence that's been happening to the Asian community with or without guns. And we know that it's, like you said, it's not a monolith, and we really want other people's perspectives. Does anybody else have any comments about gun laws within the perspective of the Asian community? Ken or Myra? And Kyle, we'll bring Kyle into this conversation too.
I just want to quickly say that we have to be careful when we talk about gun laws, and there's different narratives out there, quote unquote, representing all of Asian American community, and there are differences. Right now, there's a move by an Asian American leader or an Asian American top marksman that is using the Atlanta shootings as a case for preventing safer gun laws. But the trick there is that what he's doing is spinning safer gun laws as equivalent and the same as removing guns away from Asian Americans, and it's just not the same. So that's the quick thing I want to point out with that one.
No, we also heard that argument in the Sutherland shootings as well. It's something that comes up. Kyle, any thoughts about this?
Yeah, I just find it ridiculous how, as Myra brought up that guy, he said that we should have more lax gun laws to protect minorities. Like, that's exactly the opposite of what you do, right? In this case, these sort of things are very nuanced, and there's a lot of factors that go into it. It's not just one single factor. You can say, oh, this caused the terrorist attack, this caused the terrorist attack. It's a whole lot of factors. But firearms are certainly a factor that are that really warrants regulation in this case. And I just find it really hypocritical of folks who say Blue Lives Matter being all willy-nilly when it comes to guns. Because if those folks think that Blue Lives police officers, if they think police officers' lives are sacred, then you should support gun control so that police have to deal with less guns during their job. And when it comes to communities of color, there's always been distrust between government, mainly contained of white men, and communities of color when it came to gun ownership. And of course, we do need tighter gun ownership in terms of the requirements, background checks. But at this point in time, it might be necessary for Asian Americans to learn physical self-defense, understand how to use a firearm. These are self-defense skills that are necessary, even if a lot of us do think that there should be more regulations, because these things, guns are dangerous, but they can also potentially be very useful in a situation where, say, there's an elderly Asian American being attacked. Violence it's always a last resort, and nobody wants to see it happen. But in certain cases, there's nothing else you can do. But this is a very nuanced topic, and it's something that's very difficult.
Well, thank you. Hey, we're coming up to the conclusion, and you know what? This is the unfortunate thing about any broadcast. We could probably have 10 more questions that we need to discuss, and we hope to continue this conversation and the needed conversation to bring in more diversity and understand each other better and to really understand. So we're going to post those websites on our Facebook comments when we have time below. And you can go to the various websites to see how you can get involved, how you can take tests, take training to better understand what we've been talking about. And so we can stop Asian hate. And it is something that I need to be better trained in. And you'll have that commitment from me. I'm proud of Travis Park Church. It's a crazy church that's been around for a long time. In the 1940s, they actually opened up their sanctuary to allow people to escape internment here in Texas. and they did it once again to the migrants in 2019. I'm just, there are places of refuge, and there are places that can better understand and get involved in the community when crises happen, to see people with a common humanity. So I want to go around the room and just with about a one answer conclusion, give us your final thoughts for the evening. And I'm going to start with Ken.
Well, I think the Asian Americans that are speaking out are amazing. I think people like Kyle, man, keep speaking, because we need to hear those voices, right? Thank you.
Oh, and Ken, where would you want people to lead you if they have questions?
They can contact me at, and I'll put it in the chat here.
But this is the website right here, right? This is your correct website?
They can go there. They can go there, or they can contact me at satxlodge888888 at gmail.com.
I love it. Thank you so much. All right, we'll go next to Myra.
Well, like we've all mentioned today, there's a lot of angles, and there's a lot more discussions that need to take place. Like, for example, San Antonio being a military city, there are still military men that look at me as an Asian woman or a Filipino American, and the only thing that they remember is their R&R time when they were in Asia. And so there's a lot more conversations that we need to have that's going to be uncomfortable. But there's one thing I want the listeners and audience to remember, is that in Atlanta, remember that people laid down flowers for the lives that were lost. It wasn't about, they didn't lay down flowers for the light fixtures or the broken chairs or the broken glass. They laid down flowers for the lives lost. So even after the times that we patronize businesses, which is one good solution, there are other good solutions that involve seeing us as people, continue seeing us as people with a voice. Looking for representation, and in every place there are other human beings, and just remembering that we deserve dignity, we deserve respect, and we deserve to be included in all the conversation.
Oh, thank you. And we'll go next to Kyle.
All right. So, what I wanted to say as my final thoughts is that, ending racism, I believe somebody else said this before, it starts from the household, and it starts with interpersonal interaction. One important thing to keep in mind is that you have to be calling people out if they're racist. You have to be holding people accountable, because if you don't, then people's racism can go unchecked for years. All right. So if you have that privilege, if you have the ability, in fact, everybody has the responsibility to have these conversations with people about racism. Say, oh, you shouldn't be saying this. That's not respectful to, this group. It's not just for Asian Americans, for all, people of color. This is, do it for us. We have been, Black, Indigenous, people of color, Asian Americans. We've been here for hundreds of years. All right. And the racism still exists. So for us, please do your part. Even if it's just one conversation, do your part in stopping racism. Please, it's, y'all get your vaccine to fight coronavirus. Well, have these one-on-one conversations to fight racism.
Thank you for that, Kyle, and your leadership. And we wish you the best in your next year, your senior year, and your years to come. And Becca.
Sure. I think that the one big takeaway here is that there is a common thread in every person on this panel. And the common thread was seeing the humanity, seeing that we're not a monolith, and being able to embrace us as individuals. And confronting implicit biases that we hold is uncomfortable, right? And so they're uncomfortable conversations, but as uncomfortable as those conversations are, remember that these are our faces. We carry them with us everywhere. We don't get to take our faces off. So as uncomfortable as you feel in that moment, be aware that this is the reality that we live with every day. And so, you know, for the sake of your kids and my kid, you know, try to be the example, try to have those tough conversations so that our kids can learn from that and they can in turn do and be and have better life experiences.
Thank you. And thank you for each of you for being here tonight. And again, as people have been saying, websites and forums they could go to learn more, please go see those links in our comments below. Jackie, thank you for being with us. It's always good to work with you and the stories around San Antonio. We do have somebody watching. Emily Donaldson says hi. She says, hi, Jackie. And she did ask a question about leadership in San Antonio, which we addressed as well. So thank you, Emily, for that question, and always supporting. I know she used to work for the San Antonio Report. Now I think is at the Dallas Morning News. So thanks for watching, Emily, and all those who watched tonight. Remember to share this video, and we'll do it. Remind people, share this video, because that's how people watch Pup Theology, is when you share it, and the more you share, the more people watch. And, you know, most people watch it not live. This is just kind of our recording. So if you're watching later, we're glad you have joined us wherever you are on the internets. So Jackie, as a conclusion, we always joke at Pup Theology, usually when we're in person, because we're all crowded in some random pub. Have you ever watched, guys, have you ever watched the Jerry Springer Show? Remember the old Jerry Springer Show, right? And it was like chaos. Like the show was nuts. It was insane. It was inappropriate. But at the very end, Jerry Springer would give this 2-minute conclusion. Like it was like that crazy show never happened. It was like this really sincere, awkward, like like it was just like, how is this the conclusion of the show? And we always joke that this is how we conclude Pup Theology, because sometimes we talk about so many things, but we want a conclusion. And I really respect what you do around town, Jackie. You've heard everything. As a reporter, as somebody listening, what is your concluding remarks? What is your experience been like growing up, not only in San Antonio, but you went to the University of Texas, you lived in El Paso. Give us your concluding remarks. Take us home. I'm giving you the pulpit. Pastor Gavin's giving you the pulpit to take us home, and then we'll say bye to everybody.
Wow. I wasn't prepared for this, but I'll keep it really
Surprise.
short. My experiences and my conclusion is that life is really messy. Identity is really messy. It's really important to who we are, and it shapes who we are. And it is important to be introspective at times. I was not really put in a position where I had to think about my identity for a really long time, and that isn't a privilege in of itself as well. But growing up in El Paso, moving to Austin, coming here, I have been very, very happy to make a home here and very happy to report on San Antonio. So I don't really know what Gavin wanted from me there, but that's my conclusion. And thank you guys so much for joining us today. All
right. Well, thank you. And for each of you for being here. Again, go to those websites. Let's learn. You can go to, and we're going to put a few of them up here again. We mentioned I Holler Back. So go learn about those situations. You can go to the hashtag track AAPI hate SATX, and that is a part of a tracking AAPI Violence in San Antonio. At that link there that we will put hyperlinked in our comments, where you can go learn and track AAPI Violence in San Antonio. You can also check out all the other groups that we talked about today online and stay connected with each other. I really appreciate it. Thank you for speaking out. Thank you for revealing that we need to have a serious conversation about race, about Asian hate and Asian violence that has been going around, like you said, since the 1882, probably before that, but the Chinese Inclusion Act, from all the way that's happened all the way to Atlanta, Georgia. And when things come together and things happen again, we will support each other in various ways. Thank for each of you for being here. Pup Theology is around almost every week. We have different conversations. You can go back and look at all of our videos when we have conversations with faith leaders and community leaders and activists and educators. We have conversations with people from like Max Lucado at Oak Hills Church to the president, Danny Anderson at Trinity University. We used to have conversations with people like Bob Rivard from the San Antonio Report. So we've you can go back and watch all those videos when we started recording and check out our events again here. We're not a perfect community, but we always strive for the common good. Have a blessed evening and stay safe, San Antonio, and we'll be back here soon. Y'all stay around and we'll conclude this broadcast.